And the Thomas Paine thing is super interesting. Like reading his book about the Age of Reason. Like I told you, like the quote that out of that book that I love the most, where he was saying, "It's only by the exercise of reason that man can come to discover God." And he's like, take away that reason, and he would be incapable of understanding anything. And it makes sense the way he elucidates it, where he's saying like someone cannot. Like, you don't come from nothing. Everything comes from something. Any reasonable person can understand that one thing comes from something else. But, like, where did the first thing come from, right? Like, where did the first man come from? Reasonably, we can't fill in that blank. So we fill in the gaps with God.
Right. God of the gaps.
Because there's we have to be able to understand the way the universe works some way, right?
That's exactly what Thomas Paine was saying in Age of Reason.
Yes.
He's laying out, he's like, we've always believed that the gods were in control of the rain, or they're in control of the tsunamis and the floods.
Right.
And then we figured out what was really happening. There's a science behind it. There's a cause and effect. And then we said, okay, well, God's behind the other things, like the sun, or why does the earth move, or why are the stars moving? God's got to be that.
Right.
And it's moving into the gaps where you end up getting, like, wherever we would, any mysteries we have, anything we can't figure out, that's God.
Right.
Which I don't have a problem with that.
Right.
I think people have a right to believe in mysteries being divine.
Totally.
You know?
Totally. And then, the other great thing that he elucidates really well is that when you look at the Old Testament, he compares it to, like, anybody explaining, like in a court of law, for example. If I go into a courtroom and I give testimony based on an anonymous source, saying, I got this evidence from somebody who's anonymous, that would never hold up in a court of law. Not even in real life. If I told you something that told you I heard something from somebody who's anonymous, like you could believe me if you chose to, but you have no reason to believe what I'm saying.
Right. And that's what
add a whole nother layer onto it. Now I'm telling you, not only is the source anonymous, but the fucking sun stood still, or this person spoke face to face with God.
Right.
Now you're just taking it to a point where it's completely ridiculous.
Yeah.
And that's what he says the Bible is comprised of. It's comprised of these stories who were composed, but we don't know who the authors were. And the explanations they're getting are from anonymous sources.
Right.
And they're ridiculous claims.
Yep. He points out that Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and John, we don't even know if those are the real names. He's one of the people who put that together.
Yeah.
And he also points out that a lot of the stuff that we find in the Bible seems to also be drawing from other pagan myths.
Yes.
He points that out as well. And as you said, the sources for the claims, a big example is Paul. Paul's epistle to Corinthians is the big one. In Corinthians, Paul says that Jesus returned to 500 people. And first he appeared to Cephas, then he appeared to James, then he appeared to 500 people. And Paul never was there. Paul doesn't even name who the 500 people were.
Right.
So it's not even a primary source. It's not even a secondary source. It's kind of a third-hand source. 500 people will say this too. Christian apologists will say, we have 500 eyewitnesses that saw Jesus. Who are they? What are their names? What's their testimony? No, you have one text that says they heard from a rumor. They heard a rumor that 500 people saw him. That's not 500 individual testimonies. That's one third-hand source.
That was written down for the first time how many years after it allegedly happened?
Probably a decade after.
10 years.
Paul wrote it within a decade. Paul wrote pretty early.
Okay.
So Paul's letters, I think it's like
40-something?
40-something. Yeah, Paul wrote it about 10 years later. Yeah. Paul, maybe 20. I don't know. Paul, you have to give that credit. Yeah. Paul wrote his letter pretty early. But you're telling me that 500 people saw a risen Jesus and they didn't write anything down. And only Paul wrote it down. Nobody says anything. Nobody says, I saw a miracle today. My name is this place. I live in this city. Boom, write that out there.
Right.
Nobody else. It doesn't get to anyone. Only Paul is the only one that knows this. Sorry.
And I think you pointed it out on the first podcast that we did together, that in the Old Testament, the writings, the books of Noah were written allegedly like 800 to 900 years after he died. The first writings of...
Even later than that.
Even longer.
Because Noah... Supposedly, if let's say Noah lived and we do the math, we would end up, so this is how we do the math. You can look in Luke's genealogy, you can look in Matthew's genealogy, and you can do the math between all the sons and fathers, and you go all the way back to Noah.
Yes.
You would end up plus or minus 50 years, because some of them are like, we don't really know exactly when they died, but we're just going to give them 10 to 20 years gap, right? You can give or take some. You end up around 2500 BCE for Noah. I think that's what it is. Yeah, 2000 BCE for Noah. Give or take some. But like, you can even go, just to give it, when did Noah live? You can look that up. It's a good idea. But like,
Noah when?
So I was going to say, I'm in the middle. Like, give or take some. We don't know exactly when,
right.
But at the latest, it's going to be 3000. At the shortest, and that's if we're doing all the math about who the fathers of Josiah, Hezekiah, all the people in Jesus' genealogy going back to Noah.
Right.
You would end up somewhere between there. Okay. So
3000 to
so
2000.
the story of Noah. So let's go with the latest, or let's go with the earliest. Let's give them a bone. Let's go with 1998 BCE. Let's say Noah died in 1998 BCE. Okay, so that means the story of Noah doesn't show up in literature until 300 BC.
The first
time
writing
Noah is the first time
300?
Noah shows up in anyone's sources is 300 BC. That's over 1,000 years plus.
1,600 years.
1,600 years have gone by, and nobody mentions Noah ever.
That's pretty suspect.
Now
That is insane.
you do have other flood stories before Noah.
Yeah.
You have Ushnapishtim, you have Deucalion, you have Epic of Gilgamesh.
Yeah.
But those don't mention Noah. Those are other guys doing flood stuff. Noah
Flood stuff.
Yeah, Noah shows up. Noah shows up in the primary sources around 300
Right,
BC. Like he points out, 1,600 years have gone by. That's why when you said 900, I said it's more than that. 1,600. And that's if you give them the latest date. It might even be more than that. If I said 2,500, we're looking at 2,000 years before Noah shows up in that history. It's made up. It's made up mythology.
It's insane.
Let's just be real here.
Yeah.
You know, I know it gives a lot of people comfort to think that we have it all figured out. Religion's always been correct, but it's just not true. I'm not even an atheist. I'm just saying that this one isn't true, but I don't know what the truth is. I'm leaving it open. I think that's the best way. I think it's the best way to approach it.
And then he also said that he thinks the book of Job is the one book that doesn't belong in the biblical canon.
Who said that?
Thomas Paine.
Oh,
He said the book of Job.
I can see why he'd say that.
He said it stands totally disconnected from the other books.
it does, because it doesn't mention Abraham or Noah or Jacob or 12 tribes. It doesn't even mention Israel.
And it mentions like astronomical names.
Yeah,
and
it has
there's no
zodiac
evidence-
figures in it.
And there's no evidence that the Jews knew anything about this stuff.
Well, they do eventually, but I think I know what he means. I think I know what he means. Yeah.
He said they had no knowledge of astronomy at the time it was written.
Yes. So he's saying when Job was supposedly written, they wouldn't have had that information yet. It would have been centuries later. So yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. Yeah, Job is a weird book. It does stand in its own category.
Yeah, that's wild shit, dude.
It doesn't even happen in Israel. It happens in the land of Uz. And
Uz?
U-Z. No one even knows where that is. He never mentions the 12 tribes. Doesn't mention Jerusalem. Doesn't mention Jacob or Noah or Moses or the laws or the Torah. It's just randomly by itself. Look at location mentioned in the Old Testament prominently in the book of there is a man in the land of Uz. It is mentioned. It is most often theorized that the land is Uz. So they don't really know for sure.
Right.
They're just kind of guessing. But yeah, but yeah. So the founding. I just want to. I think if there's anything I'm really trying to like drive home, is that these revolutions that happened between the end of the 18th century through the middle of the 19th century, with American Revolution, French Revolution, and so forth, are driven not by Judeo-Christian ethics, but the opposite of that. The actual rejection of those things. And that's what our Constitution is kind of built on. It's kind of built on the ethics that are opposing Judeo-Christianity and looking and sort of drawing from the old Roman Republic of the pagan culture,
Right.
the Dionysian Apollonian culture.
Yeah.
You know,
That's pretty fucking wild, dude.
it is.